Okay. A little bit about myself and Scismic, the organization. So I am the co-founder, one of the co-founders of Scismic. I did my PhD in Australia and then moved to Boston to do 2 postdocs. So quite a lot of number of years in academia, and then transitioned to industry. And as my co-founder and I, as we were actually making that transition ourselves, we realized a lot of disconnect between our training years in academia and what industry actually values and needs or looks for when they hire people. And industry hires 85% of people coming out of academia. So they're the sector that hires most of us. And so we started putting out career development resources out there so that people like ourselves and you all have information to go by to prepare for a career in industry, to look at that as a career that could be one to actually target and move into proactively. And so Scismic is essentially, we do 2 things. We provide career development resources such as this webinar. We've got blog posts, we have YouTube videos, and our goal is to help the academic trainee population prepare for a career in industry, to get information and have access to the right people for conversations to prepare for careers in industry. And once they go into industry, we put out programming to help make sure that you are navigating that career path effectively for your career progression. And the second thing we do is we have an online platform, Scismic.com, that is a skills-based talent matching platform tailored for the STEM tech industries. And so that is biotech, medtech, agriculture, clean tech, really any industry sector that has a STEM component to it. We work with companies to hire people like yourselves into roles based on the skills and expertise that you have and that they need. So definitely visit Scismic.com, reach out to science@scismic.com, and we'll be very happy to help you through that journey. But today we will focus on the kind of how industry view your postdoctoral trainee stage. What assumptions do they make from that? What conclusions do they take from that? How do they have concerns? What those concerns might be, so that we help you address these in your cover letter or your CV or resume. So benefits of a postdoc, what are some things you actually develop within your postdoctoral years that really set you up for success in an industry career track? How to pitch yourself, how to highlight those things in your CV, and then kind of any additional concerns in a Q&A. So I'm going to try and make the kind of content delivery part as short as possible so that we have enough time for question and answers. We have a lot of people here today. Again, thank you so much for those of you who've joined to spend your evening or your afternoon, or your morning with us. We're honored to kind of have you at the webinar. All right, so the first section is essentially, how does industry view postdocs? How is it different to your graduate experience? So usually when we work with a client and we're setting up a job post or a job description, and you're kind of setting up your resume to respond to those sections or those requirements within the job description, you're asked to put there how many total work years, how many total work experience years have you kind of clocked up. Now, your graduate research experience usually does not count as work experience, but your postdoctoral experience does count as work experience. And the key difference from the point of view of industry, so the person hiring or looking at your resume with an industry, the key difference here is in your postdoctoral years, the assumption is that you've led a research project independently from start to finish, and you are the person responsible for managing all the stakeholders within that project to a successful outcome and through the obstacles and hurdles that you encounter throughout. So the key difference is essentially in a postdoctoral experience, you're driving your project. In a graduate experience, that is not the assumption. Here's a very simple table of kind of how some key differences and key areas of concern for industry when they're looking to hire, when they're hiring someone directly from academia. One of the, when we speak to hiring managers, one of their biggest concerns is mindset. So the nature of work in academia, the nature of how you run your research projects in academia or your areas of study in academia is quite different to the environment and the mindset within industry. Three primary areas of concern. So first is pace of progress made. In academia, we tend to it's a lot of a slower pace. You're really opening more questions than you're answering them. There's not such tight deadlines to when you finish your postdoctoral years, when you finish your project. It's really more coming from you and your PI and how you set those deadlines internally. Now in industry, your deliverables affect the whole company, the whole department, or the whole team. And so oftentimes you're presenting very frequently at weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings or whatever they may be. And together you're making decisions, very quick go, no-go decisions on next steps based on results from this one experiment. It's very deadline focused. A team has objectives and milestones they have to hit. Companies have milestones they have to hit. So everything kind of feeds up into larger milestones that the companies have to hit in order for that particular technology to keep moving through the commercialization funnel. So your part is part of a much bigger part, in which case, if you don't deliver on time, it does really affect a lot of things moving forward for the company that is very costly to them. End goal, the nature of the end goal is very different. In academia, your end goal for a postdoctoral period is really a presentation or a paper or a publication or a patent, something where there's a written or delivery or kind of a package full story that you're delivering to your ecosystem and to your scientific community. Now in industry, your end goal is really, again, those, results to one experiment, results to multiple experiments, an answer to kind of an objective question. Your end goal is really to help your team hit their milestones. It's really not a full story. You're looking at very quick step-by-step go, no-go decisions. And then the work environment, in academia, we tend to work more independently. Everything comes kind of, again, we are self-starters. We set our own timelines and deadlines. We work as fast or as slow as we need to or want to. Now in industry, it's very team-driven. You are one member of a team, one team of multiple teams within the company. And so you kind of, this nature of your day-to-day, no one really depending on your day-to-day results or work, versus a lot of people have a lot of money and are significantly depending on your results to kind of move the team forward in industry. So three big areas: pace of progress made, the nature of the end goal and your deliverables, and the work environment, the nature of the work environment, from very independent driven work to kind of really very team driven work. So the consequence of you being late to something affects a lot of people, not just yourself. Now we go into kind of the key things you gain from your postdoctoral years, things to really highlight, right? Project leadership, you kind of, people looking at you to have had experience being responsible for conceptualizing a project, taking it through its obstacles and hurdles all the way to end goal, publication, presentation, standing up and kind of really presenting that. Presentation skills, standing up and presenting information in a way that is synthesized not just from your work, but also from the body of work published out there around your topic, and processing that, seeing how your piece fits in, and then kind of presenting that to the world. Troubleshooting, from at the level of the assay to at the level of issues, submitting your grant on the portal, all these types of things. But, typically during your postdoctoral years, you are making things work for your project and your lab. So problem solvers, troubleshooters, teamwork, hopefully you've kind of really developed some collaboration either within your lab or within your research environment to other institutes, to maybe even industry partners, like really highlighting some of those collaborations with multiple different types of stakeholders, and going to seek them out as well to make your project a success, right? That's something that is a benefit. It's again up to you to go and make that happen. Mentoring, whether you've mentored undergraduate students or graduate students, adaptability, again, you kind of working with the resources you have, working to changing environments, changing project directions, succeeding in multiple environments, writing and record keeping, very responsible for your own kind of what would we say, logistics in a sense, your lab book keeping, or your record keeping, your inventory, idea generation, and then studying independently. So these are all skills that giving you ideas of things that are quite valuable that you actually have further developed within your postdoctoral years. And then technical skills, right? So most of us within the STEM industry, we've gained technical skills. That's our kind of core competency. So hoping that in your postdoctorate, you kind of structure it so it's not just a continuation of your graduate studies, but you're actually out there going and acquiring new skills, new cutting edge skills, or just new skills in general that widen your core competency, widen the area of which you can now operate functionally in industry, right? Also, one thing that is really very, very important that we underestimate is optimizing assays or optimizing methods within your postdoctoral years. You're probably, I mean, in any kind of research environment, you're probably going to set up a new type of, experimental method or a new type of assay. And so having gone through the motions of designing it, optimizing it, and then now running it, and oftentimes other people coming in, adopting and running it as well, developing protocols over it. That's actually a very important technical skill that we underestimate and industry really, really values. And that's termed assay development in the life sciences sphere. So that's very important to highlight. So learning new technical skills, and again, hopefully you're thinking about your postdoc years as, if you're moving towards industry, what could be valuable in industry that you can pick up and you can kind of start to add into your repertoire of skills and get achieve high proficiency levels, so that by the time you're coming into industry, you know what's marketable and you have those things and you make yourself very marketable to the job market. And then assay development, very important one that we always underestimate in academia. And then kind of just in general, particularly for very specialized areas, if you were in rare diseases or in kind of some very, very cutting edge sequencing technology, but you're really that expert in that field, in that very new field, right? The postdoctoral years is for you to definitely develop some, credibility in that. So through your publications, through your presentations, putting your name to that kind of area of expertise, and demonstrating that commitment to scientific advancement and resilience. There are, companies with innovation departments. There are smaller companies that really kind of rely on people who know an area really, really well to help them push its boundaries. So that's where these things become very, very valuable to highlight. And then, as I mentioned, I mean, these things are great to talk about. Like we can praise ourselves and say, these are all the great things we've gotten from our postdoctoral years. But the key here is to know what to highlight and then how to highlight it in a way that you are presenting yourself to meet the requirements and exceed the requirements of a particular role that you could be looking at, right? So how do you pitch yourself knowing all that? The first thing is, and this is very, very important, we come out of academia, we're very proud of the work we have done, and we oftentimes think of the project and not ourselves. Now, remember, in industry, they're hiring you. They're not interested in funding your project. So what they're looking for is not so much your project to speak about the novelty or the cutting edgeness of your project or how useful or functional your project is, or it's really what have you developed within working in that project. So market yourself, not your project. We see this happen very often where there's paragraphs and paragraphs are just so many dot points where we are trying so hard to explain our project. That's not the important thing. The important thing is yourself and the things that you have achieved with that project. Back up your answers with skills, your answers/skills with evidence. Now, this is also important. So, kind of having statements that in your description area for a particular project or experience. So let's say postdoc years from 2001 to 2005, project title, you can say achievement, and then you can say, right, like established a new assay or developed a new assay, or, very proficient in assay development within the genomic space or the sequencing space, and then have, optimized assay adopted by other labs, assay transfer protocol developed, and actually, company A has been using it, or labs B has been using it, or the assay was adopted and published in these other publications. Back it up with evidence. You developed this assay that now many other people have used, which means it's fairly validated as an assay. as an example. Frame narrative on outcomes and your contributions, right? So your dot points should, again, not be kind of the novel, cool things about your project, but essentially things you achieve from them. Develop assay, establish a collaboration with industry partners where you were the key driver and, presented at weekly meetings, things like that. Know your strongest qualification. Now, in brackets that are relevant to the role that you're applying for. You will have many strong qualifications coming out of your postdoctoral years. You've got your PhD or your master's behind you and your undergraduate experience. You now have a wealth of qualifications, of skill sets that you're walking out with that you're very strong in. It is not necessarily to highlight. It's not necessary to highlight. In fact, it's not advised to highlight everything for every role. Know the role that you're applying for, know what they're asking for, and highlight the ones that you are proficient and strong in that kind of speak from, where you have evidence of that. And that is very relevant for the role you're applying for. Okay, that's important. Make sure you're tailoring your application for the role you're applying for. And then practice pitching them with brevity. This is essentially just making sure you're, talking about it in a way that you can easily explain these qualifications, these skill sets, and how you use them in a way that is quite articulate. Do the extra work, right? Make sure you qualify for the role by understanding the job description. Make sure you have the must-have skills the role needs down. Know that you do not have to meet every nice-to-have skill that the role has highlighted. Make sure you can differentiate the two from the way the job description has been structured. This is something we help with, and is actually we've built this into our algorithm because sometimes it's very hard to understand what a job description needs versus wants to have that is kind of nice to have in a person. Tailor your application to each role. Study the company before the interview, not just the product, not just their technology, but also their values and their mission. So you're aware of these things as you're kind of walking in. Do your homework, essentially. Now, kind of the industry concerns that we had highlighted before, and ways that we suggest you can work around them or kind of address them in some sense, so that by the time you're applying for a role, you have answers to some of those concerns, or you've addressed them in your CV. Research the industry through seminars and trade sites. So kind of attend free talks online where you're starting to pick up on language of that sector. Every sector has their own kind of terminology that is often very different to academia that is commonly used. So an example within the biopharma sector, you have drug development, you have process development, you have biomanufacturing, you have quality. Know what all these different things are that might not be specific to the department you're going to applying to, but give you a sense of the actual sector, of the way drugs are made, or the way crop design occurs, etc. Demonstrate your passion for the application of science rather than a specific area of research. So the application part is quite important. And again, best way to kind of demonstrate that is to understand and speak the language. Addressing and having things to highlight in your CV that help to address the team versus individual work, cross-train and serve as a mentor, show that you've mentored people, show that you've gone out and kind of sought out collaborative studies, highlight co-authored papers or projects, indicate where you've got industry relationships already built, indicate where you've had to build new relationships, how you manage the team, serve on your postdoc association or other university serving groups, any kind of extra curricular, if you'd like, related to the postdoc training years, anything that kind of show that you go out and you seek, you work as a team, you've been part of a team where you're a key contributing member, and you weren't just in your lab kind of doing your own project by yourself. Responding to the industry pace, so highlight critical decision-making points in the description of your experience / project, so that, when you've got the title, you've got, let's say, your key success points from this, so publish a paper or wrote a patent, etc. And then you're describing your project and your contribution to the different stages of the project in bullet point, right? highlight here where you had come to certain points where you had to either, something had happened and you had to make quick no-go decisions, and you had decided this way, these were your reasons. These help to tell them that you didn't kind of just go from start to finish without really assessing things. You had a deadline you had set for yourself, and you were kind of on track with meeting those deadlines by assessing making smart decisions along the way, in a sense that made sure you got to an endpoint goal that was a productive outcome, was a successful outcome. Structure the description of your experiences by objectives and milestones hit. That's another way of doing it, showing them you think in terms of objectives and milestones, because that's in industry, you're typically, you've got individual people working through deliverables that kind of hit up objectives, that hit up team or company milestones. And so if you demonstrate some thinking, structuring your descriptions in those categories, it helps them to see how you kind of worked up and how you break things down in a way that is familiar to them. So some additional things that we've heard people ask us. I've done multiple postdocs. Do I look too academic? Honestly, 2 postdocs, not bad at all, pretty common these days. It is becoming less and less necessary for people to do postdocs. So if you are really going into a second postdoc or contemplating that, really think about why you're doing that. Are you trying to change fields? Are you trying to pick up a skill that you really want to pick up that you don't have right now that will make you very marketable in the industry? Really kind of think through that. There is no expiration date, but there is a greater concern that the longer you stay in academia, it is harder for you to break out of that academic mindset. But, again, there are ways to kind of connect specific things. So connect specific things within those multiple postdocs to things that you're looking to do now, new skills, critical breakthroughs, moving fields, moving industries, love of team, science. Practice answering questions. Why do you want this job? Why did you go into this 2 postdocs or 3 postdocs? How do they help? How do you think it help set you up for this job? And you want to make sure you know the specific things you've gotten from the multiple postdoc stints that has contributed to you being prepared for this particular role. Make sure that answer is clear, because they'll probably ask that. Or even if they don't, you want to kind of voice that out to say, maybe my first one I knew didn't give me marketable skills, then I had to do the second one, and then I had to do the third one because I really had to get these other skill set from these different labs, something like that. I'm close to publishing an important study. Should I wait? This is something we get a lot, right? Someone who's looking for a job, started looking for a job, they get an offer, but they're close to publishing their paper, and they're kind of torn between, do they stay in this lab in their postdoc years and forego this offer to get that paper first finished and then move, or do they take that offer, either figure out a way to finish the paper on the side, or just not finish that paper? And the question really needs to be pointed back to you, right? How certain is it that you want an industry career? The fact that this job has already, this company has already offered you the job without this paper being published means that this paper is probably not very valuable to you getting into industry. So this paper might be valuable to you specifically, or to your PI. Maybe that's, if you leave, it burns a bridge. That's something to think about. But really think about, right, whether you need this paper for something else that is not functioning, going to, being used to get you into an industry career. Industry does not care much about publications. They care. I'm not saying they don't care at all. But again, if companies offer you a job and you don't have that paper yet, and they've already offered you the job, like, how necessary is that publication and if your goal is to get into industry, right, how necessary is it to get into industry that way? If you're certain, do not delay, set up the lab to finish the work for you. Find, there's always a grad student or someone you can find to say, hey, I'll go co-author with you, or you could come in a second author, or whatever it is. Can you help me finish these last 2 experiments? There's always an arrangement to be made there. But I, again, want to bring your attention to, if the company's already offered you a job without your publication, how important is that publication? If you're not certain, weigh the offer before rejecting. Chances are there is probably a way you can still publish. It might mean that a couple of weekends you go in and finish something, but, again, it depends on where your priorities lie, what's important to you at that stage. Cost-benefit ratio. how do I tell my PI I'm looking to go into industry? I'm looking to get jobs in industry. This is a tricky one, right? So the first thing is why would a PI react negatively? Well, a PI would only react negatively if they felt like you were going to leave them in a lurch and not finish the project that you had started with them. So perhaps my suggestion is to make sure that you're meeting your project goals in a timely manner. You give them reassurance that this is your goal. You would like to finish this and this before you go, and you're going to time it. So you're going to start looking here, but it does mean you're going to have to do these, choose what you need to tell them. Give them the reassurance that your goals and their goals for your project are aligned, and they shouldn't have too much of a problem with anything else. So kind of make sure that, it's clear this is their expectation from your project. It's aligned with your goals and what you're going to deliver. And then anything else, really, it really depends on the person. The suggestion is always to be very open about your career goals, but I've been a postdoc twice. There are a couple of those PIs that I probably won't be as open with. It really just depends on your relationship with them and what that person is like. But, make sure your expectations and their expectations of the deliverables for your project are aligned, because at least that way you have done your part, if nothing else from their perspective. Get a mediator, faculty, career services, postdoctoral office if necessary, to make sure those conversations go okay. Now, hopefully I finished. Yes, I wanted to make sure there was ample time for questions.
We've already had a couple in the chat, so we'll just jump right in. One person was wondering how common Latex is for publications in industry or for collaborating in industry. Is that a skill that's needed?
I wouldn't say it's a skill that's needed. I'd say it's a very nice to have skill. And there's some very cool platforms out there that really make it quite easy for that to occur as well. So not 100% absolutely needed, but I think it's a very kind of nice edge, gives you a bit of an edge over the rest.
What exactly we mean by editing or tailoring a resume, if you can give examples on that.
Yeah, for sure. And this is an important point, actually. So thank you for asking that question. Now, typically, when you set up your resume, you have a top section that is a summary section where it's kind of like a 3-sentence paragraph that is a cover letter, 3-sentence paragraph, right? It's what you're currently an expert in, or what your area of expertise in, what you want to do, and why you think you fit this role, essentially, how it kind of aligns. And then you come down to your, work experience, where you highlight the where you did it, the time period, the title of that work project. If you did multiple, it'll be like, let's say 3 subsections, some dot points under to say what were the key successes you gained from this, and what was the nature of the project. And again, you want to frame it in what were the objectives and milestones you hit along the way. And when I say tailor, what I mean is you choose. So firstly, the summary is an obvious thing. You have to tailor it for every job, because you want to show what you are proficient in that the job needs, and then therefore why you are a best fit for that particular role. This is not going to apply to different roles, are going to speak to different subsets of your skill sets. So you want to pick the subsets of your skill sets that fit that role best and highlight that subset, not every single skill you have. So when you go into the kind of description section, again, if the job is in a startup company, it's not in a big corporation, it's in a smaller company, perhaps saying, you wear multiple hats, you juggle multiple things, and you are agile, you are very adaptable to timelines, you stick to timelines, or something that speaks to the nature of that job, whether it's skill sets or environment. If you're talking to a larger organization, that's where you are applying, I would really focus on more like the team side of things, working really well with a team, very communicative. You've presented a lot with different types of stakeholders. You know to speak language of different departments within one organization. So tailoring here means understanding what the job description needs and highlighting only the parts that really speak to those needs.
Great, great. Thanks, Danika. One sort of related question is, if you are transitioning into a new field of research or a different field from what maybe your postdoc was in, how can you best present that in a resume when you're kind of shifting fields?
It's a good one. Typically, the way people do it is they highlight things that, I mean, you're shifting fields, but you probably have particular core competencies that match what the job needs. So it doesn't really matter too much the field, because if a job needs you to be really great at preparing sequencing libraries, running sequences, and analyzing all that information, you can, that's the specific skill. That's what you take, that's what you highlight in your CV to match the job description. So the field itself may not be very very important. In fact, when we assess fits with our hiring clients, it's very rare that they would say to us, this person comes from an entirely different field, unless the job specifically says you need to understand the nuances of these specific things because we need you to communicate with these things. But in general, if you're coming in as a scientist and you have all these different skill sets that match these different skill sets, it usually doesn't matter as much the field. But one way to address it is just to highlight, okay, well, I did a quick internship, or I did a brief online course that has given me some kind of basic skills to understand this new field. Show them that you are interested and have understood this new field, whether it's online courses or webinars you've attended or some internships or shadowing you've done, something to show them that you come from a different field, you identify there could be differences, and the way you've addressed that is you've gone out and gotten this information. Put that in your CV.
You talk a lot about using their language or using the industry language for things. If you're not at all familiar with industry, what's one way you can go about learning what that language is, or how do you familiarize yourself with that language?
So again, speak to people from that industry, from that field, organize what we call, we used to call them, is not problem interviews. I can't remember the terminology, but essentially go to LinkedIn and say, look, I'm very interested in this field. I come from this, I'm not very familiar, and I want to make sure I'm setting myself up for success. Would you mind if I, bought you a cup of coffee or jumped on Zoom for 30 minutes, take 30 minutes of your time, where I want to better understand what you do on a day-to-day basis, etc. And they'll start to talk and they'll start to throw around words, or even ask them, look, what are some key terms that when you came from academia, from your postdoc, were completely new to you and you had to scramble to learn when you came into industry? I've actually asked people that before as well. We also have, I believe, Jenny, we have a webinar we've done on this called Biotech Speak, and this is for the biotech industry specifically, but where we just go through words where we knew were different from, were not commonly used in academia, that we knew are used in industry heavily. So for whoever asked that question, please let us know. We're happy to send you that webinar.
Yeah, for sure. Along those same lines, we were asked about how do you network within the industry to make those connections to make your transition easier. So I imagine what you just described, reaching out on LinkedIn, is one good way. Are there any other ways to start to network with people outside of academia to help you make this transition?
I know in the hub cities, so West Coast and East Coast, we have a lot of networking events where people, people just go. I mean, we used to hold a lot of networking events pre-COVID, where we would have industry partners there, as well as kind of just invite anyone within their grad studies and postdoctoral years to just come in and network. And that used to be very popular. So seek out networking events. The second way is, if they're not accessible to you because you're located geographically, maybe not one of the hubs, or for whatever other reasons, maybe reach out to your career development, your postdoctoral office of your university, and connect with us. We organize free events for a lot of different postdoc offices to make sure there's access. So if you reach out to them and the two of you guys connect with us, or somehow connect us to them, we'll work something out where we'll try and see what's needed and run an event so that there's some access. We typically run a lot of panel sessions to make sure that people have access to individuals who are already in industry, who have made that transition. So look out for networking events is really the best way. Reach out on LinkedIn is the second best way. But also, if you notice that there's just not many events around you, connect with your postdoc office. If there's interest there, connect with us and we'll sort something out in terms of trying to get you a panel session or something tailored for your institution.
Great. And Cecilia mentions that if you're not in the US, you can also look for consulate events from biotech environment. So that's a really good tip from her. Thank you.
Yep.
So speaking of being in another country, we had several questions related to visas. Is it advisable to do a postdoc in the country you're looking to work in first, or do companies sponsor visas? Should you wait till you get a green card? What is the best advice you have for someone who is non-citizen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I'm an immigrant into the US, and I came in, did 2 postdocs, and then applied for a green card and got into industry that way because it was at that time getting more competitive for companies to sponsor. Pre-COVID, though, I knew that at least 50% of the roles that we worked with, companies actually did sponsor visa, but post-COVID, that has dramatically changed, primarily because of the backlog with immigration and the time it takes. So my advice is, if you do have a sense of where you would like to settle and get a job next, I think it is easier to go in and do a postdoc in that country. It is not the easiest thing right now for people to kind of get work visas, and this will vary country to country, but in the US, I know wait times are just long. It is not impossible, but typically they will do it for director level and above. So either getting a job in the country where you're in and then getting transferred if it's a larger organization, so one of big pharma or some of those big agricultural companies, they will consider that, or doing a postdoc in the country just helps you get a little bit more familiar. I would apply for a job once you have your work authorization. I can't remember what it's called, but the work authorization granted, then you can start applying for a job, because at least your green card is, it's coming soon. Otherwise, between you getting your work authorization and the offer letter, the discrepancy there the time there could be risky. So you just waste your time looking too early.
And then we have some questions around, how do you answer the question, why do you want to shift away from academia into industry? And particularly, is there a bad answer to that question?
It depends on who you ask. In my opinion, there is, I don't know that there is a bad answer. I don't think there's a bad answer. I also don't know what that person could do about it, even if they thought the answer was bad. And perhaps if you're answering, if this question is coming from a hiring manager, I would try and focus it on your passion for actually pushing that technology into whatever sector, market sector, something that is not I don't like academia, it was just too slow there, or I wasn't getting a faculty track position. Kind of shifting it to a more positive tone, whatever the answer might be, but it having a positive kind of, academic research is a lot of fun. My answer was always, I enjoyed my time in academia, but progress was a little too slow for me. I kind of enjoy the more specific goal-oriented pace of work. And I really wanted to kind of move to the next step of getting closer to working with products that were getting into the clinic. Very generic answer in a way, but also very true, and has a positive spin of academia was a little too slow. Industry is a little quicker in terms of pace, and I like the quicker pace, something like that.
And I think some of the reason for that question stems from if you happen to have a toxic postdoc environment,
yeah,
and you probably can't get good recommendations. What is the best way to move out of that situation quickly? And does it look bad to be looking for industry jobs in that scenario?
It does not look bad to be looking for industry jobs in that scenario. You should make sure you deliver on your project. Again, make sure there's alignment on what the expectation is. You don't have to tell your PI what you're planning to do next, to be honest, but you do need to, the one thing you need to commit to is what their expectations are for you and your project, and what your expectations are, and make sure they're somewhat aligned, right? Because once that's the case, you know what to deliver on, and then you do your networking and do your applications on the other side to make sure you get to where you need to get to, without burning any bridges, without letting anybody down, and with your integrity intact. So my advice is just make sure you get that alignment on expectations from your PI and yourself for your project, not for your career track. That is not their concern.
And so a related question, how important are those letters of recommendation from your PI? Does industry
Not important
care?
at all.
Okay.
Not important at all. Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
I never got any letter of recommendations from my PI.
Good. Again, Cecilia, very good resource. If you do find yourself in a toxic situation in your lab and you identify as a woman, friendsofsarah.org can be a really great resource for you as well. On a more positive note, what if you loved academia and you go into industry and you realize, actually, I would rather go back to academia. How common is it, or how easy is it to move from industry back into academia?
Much easier these days, especially if, let's say, you're coming, and I've known this to be, this is a true story, multiple true stories around this. Come out of academia, 1 or 2 years in industry, don't really like it, go back into academia, not a problem at all. If you come out for 10 years and want to go back, not necessarily a problem at all as well. There are plenty of organizations like ARPA, funding organizations like ARPA, etc. They kind of give grants. They put out grants for people who are in industry and want to do different types of projects. Opportunities are there. I'd say you need to demonstrate that you are still at the cutting edge of your, doing cutting edge research in your field and publishing in some way. So you do have to make sure that you're publishing prolifically or somehow putting out your work in a way that you can demonstrate that you're up to date and in fact, can go back. If you're going back to a postdoc, not at all, but if you're going back to kind of faculty track, it'll be the same kind of requirements that you would have to prove.
Another question is clarity around what do they actually mean when they say industry experience? A lot of jobs do require this, and how do you know, do they mean industry, or do they count your postdoc as an industry? Like what is that even mean when you see it in a job description?
Industry is really anything non-academic. So if someone's been at a nonprofit organization, sometimes depending on the nature of work, I'd even count that as industry experience. It's really anything outside of academia. So definitely not your postdoc. If you've got an industry postdoc, you could probably swing it that way a little bit. But industry experience does mean that usually they want at least 1 to 2 years of you working in a company that is outside of an academic institution.
Do you recommend an industry postdoc as a good transition point for people?
I mean, I don't not recommend it. I don't think it's extra special. I think it's interesting, but I haven't seen my friends and colleagues who have done it get opportunities that a person from industry haven't, directly from, academia, who's done their postdoc in academia hasn't gotten. The pay is better. So lifestyle wise, it is a better option. I think the pay is much better.
Good to know. And Norpat asks about, is startup experience considered industry experience?
Yes, absolutely.
And then here's a kind of a related question for somebody who is currently sort of, their postdoc is in collaboration with the utility company, so they're part of the research center. How can they get that like utility company that's part of, or the utility companies that are part of the project, to see this person as not a postdoctoral research associate, but someone who could be a research scientist within that utility company? How do you make that, if you say already have collaborations within your lab with industry, how do you move them to see you in that way, or to kind of finagle those partnerships into something that could turn into a job?
You speak their language and you work in a way that is productive. You're not asking entirely explorative questions. You're working towards deliverables and objectives and milestones. So just making sure your work with them is kind of going this way, honing in on a goal, as opposed to kind of widening the scope of something. Show them you have that mindset of goal-oriented, fast-paced, right? You're quick go, no-go. You're evaluating return on investment in certain things. You've got that mindset of you're working towards a specific outcome that is very functional and very commercial focused. You're not just asking explorative questions and doing, goal-oriented.
Good.
So presenting yourself with specific work
Right. So
cultures, not really ethics, but cultures. Yeah.
yeah. So in that sense, hospital experience could also apply as industry experience in terms of the deadlines and tight turnarounds and things like that, working as a team.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. One question that I think most postdocs have is, I am so busy. Where would I even find time to collaborate and work in a team to set myself up for some of these kind of communicative and team skill and management skills that might be necessary for industry?
Again, I think having clarity on what it is your project needs to deliver, what you need to deliver on your project to your PI, for both you and your PI, and for you to establish a timeline for yourself. So, right, like I want to do this in 3 years and this is what I want to achieve, right? And anything more is not necessary if it's not going to get you where you want to go. So having 5 publications versus 10 publications, do you need 10 publications to get into industry? No, you need 5, right? So kind of getting alignment in terms of what you're expected to deliver on for yourself as well as for your PI, and also understanding what is going to be beneficial for your next step. If industry is your next step, right, getting on more papers is not the answer, right? Doing 5 papers well and then going, 5 is really in a stretch, like doing 2 or 3 papers well, right, and then going out there networking and getting those ins, that's probably where your priority should lie. So kind of assessing the return on investment in terms of your activities.
Mm. And I'd also say if you do feel yourself to be that stretched, then that might be a good opportunity to delegate some of the work, which would then also be collaboration that you could use on your skills. We also had a question about whether or not an internship in industry makes sense after a postdoc.
It could be a stepping stone. It could be if you get an internship, make sure it's paid. And if it's not, make it very short. But it is a way to network. So yes, if you're not getting job offers or not kind of needing that experience, it definitely is valuable. Just make sure you're paid.
Mm-hmm. Good. How does industry look at national lab postdoc experience versus like a more academic traditional postdoc?
It's not very common, to be honest. So it at the moment is kind of just looked at as a postdoc. I think more color can be shed on when you describe the work you've done and kind of really bring out some of those qualities that might be more industry like. But at the moment it's viewed, a postdoc is always viewed, even if it's industry postdoc, kind of viewed as a postdoc stint.
Okay. How about 501c3? So we know startup counts as industry, but what about running a nonprofit organization? Does that count as industry experience?
Yeah, I think it counts as, yes, it would, because it will not, yeah, it would.
Another question is, how important are papers? So let's say your lab only publishes very high level papers, it takes over 5 years. If you apply to industry with no papers, how is that viewed? Would that be?
I mean, typically you do want to publish something. It's just to show, it demonstrates productivity. If you come out with no papers, then you want to make sure you've either presented somewhere or you've kind of written other forms or something to show productivity, because the papers is a way to measure your productivity externally. So I guess the question would be, are there other ways you could demonstrate that you were productive for those 5, 3, 4 years?
Great. One question is kind of around academic CVs versus industry CVs. Like, what's the difference? And do you cite publications directly in your resume, or, is it different than how it's done in an academic CV?
It is very different to how it's done in an academic CV. For industry, you provide maybe 5 very relevant publications only, and then you provide a link to your Google Scholar after that.
Another one is about transitioning. If you are planning to transition to industry, what is the timeline? When should you start applying if you want to have work by a given date? Like, how soon should you begin that search?
I would say 4 months until you need to have a job at the earliest. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Much quicker than academic, right? So yeah, begin applying at least or 4 months is probably good. And then, you know, 3 months, 2 months is when you really start.
Yeah, ramping up.
Got it. And then what kind of postdoc experiences put you on a better track for coming into industry as a principal scientist versus a senior scientist?
It is very rare that one can come in directly into a company as a principal scientist. So I would say you would need to be a fairly senior postdoc who's maybe run a small group of your own. 1 or 2 people under you, where you've been running independent grants, things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Somebody asked about the length of an industry CV.
Oh, 2 pages maximum.
Right.
Maximum, 1.5, preferably.
Mm-hmm. And is there any harm in networking earlier with industry, even if you're not, directly applying, but just having like those informational interviews?
Yeah, you should network earlier for sure, because those relationships will take time to kind of develop into anything. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And back to this sort of timeline of applying, and this will be our final question, everybody. So what is the timeline between sort of a company making you an offer and the start date? Is it usually pretty tight? I mean, they're worried about having a gap between the postdoc work.
It's 2 to 4 weeks, 4 weeks generously. So on average, 2 weeks is the timeline of when you get an offer letter and when you're expected to start. Like a month is, it's very tight. So a month is like quite lucky if they kind of will wait for you for a month.
Okay. Since that was a short answer, I'll squeeze one final question in. Is it possible for a PhD to get a scientist job without the postdoc?
Yes, it is possible. Very, very possible these days.
Great.
I would only consider doing a postdoc if there was extra skills you needed to develop to get into that career path.
Great.
Otherwise, I would go straight. Yeah. If industries where you want to go.
Right. If anyone has any additional questions that weren't answered, you can email us here at science@scismic.com.
Don't hesitate to go out there and ask people for 30 minutes of their time. People are very generous and usually want to give back. I did this a lot when I was coming out of my postdoc looking for jobs. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're usually very happy to help. Definitely check us out on scismic.com. We have plenty of jobs. And yeah, good luck with anything. And I know it seems daunting, but you'll see by the number of people who have signed up and attended this, there are many people in the same boat. You'll all get through this, I have no doubt, and you have a lot of resources. Lean on us if you need to.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon or evening or whatever it happens to be for you today. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being with us. Bye.